Welcome back to the channel, everyone. And we had just recently watched another oversimplified mini war, the Falkland one. We're going to be watching the Football War, which is apparently a war that was started about the game football or soccer. The reason we're paused here, though, is apparently there's potentially a suicide warning inside this one. So be very careful on that if that's a trigger for you. So let's get started.
Quick, you have 2 seconds to name these two countries.
El Salvador and Honduras.
You're wrong, unless you got it right. Then good job. They are, of course, Honduras and El Salvador.
Sweet.
One thing these two countries have in common is being fanatic about football.
Yeah.
Or if you're a freedom-loving patriot, soccer. But do they love it so much they would go to war over it? You bet they would.
Okay. All right, I gotta see
They
something.
would go to war over it? You bet they would. If you're a freedom-loving patriot, soccer.
Wow. That's all muscle.
But do they love it so much they would go to war over it? You bet they would, and that is no bueno. If you look at these two countries, you might notice one major difference, and that is that this one is a lot bigger than this one. However, this one had a larger population than this one, made up mostly of farmers, and there wasn't enough land for them to live and work on. So they started moving from El Salvador to
You'd expect the one that has the most population to have like a bunch of major cities or something versus just all farmland.
Honduras in search of land, and by the 1960s, a huge number of illegal immigrants had crossed over the border from El Salvador.
Guess illegal immigrants are everywhere. It's not just coming into one country that likes to blame it on everything.
Meanwhile, in Honduras, it's 1963, and this guy has just staged a military coup to prevent the rise of communism, and is now the military leader of the country.
Okay, so he wants to stop communism, so he's created a military coup. I mean, in one respect, that's actually a good thing. But I assume he's going to be a puppet leader.
He immediately began harassing the peasants' unions and other left-wing groups, but he's a little insecure about the legitimacy of his leadership. So he holds an election and wins, but then the opposing party...
Yeah, that sounds like if he wins by that much, it sounds more like actual, like, legitimate fraud in an election.
party says, hey man, that election was clearly corrupt and fraudulent, and also you've been bribed by the rich American banana company.
Yeah, that seems like what an American company would look like. Way too much of something. And bananas for hands.
Who are taking all of our bananas tax-free, and now our economy is in ruins, and everyone started to get mad at him. Now, if you ever find yourself the barely legitimate military leader of a corrupt Central American country, and you start getting into hot water, here's a bit of advice that has been tried and tested throughout the centuries.
Blame someone else.
Something else.
Yes.
So he blamed the Salvadoran immigrants for stealing all the land and all the jobs and ruining
You could do that with anything. Everyone seems to do that, especially with the internet now.
Honduras. The immigrants found themselves under attack by the hostile locals. Egged on by the rich American banana companies who wanted all the bananas to themselves, the Honduran government began evicting Salvadoran immigrants who had been living on the land for generations and started sending them back to El Salvador.
So in theory, you can just blame America for this one. Yeah, it definitely was the corrupt government that wasn't helping here. But I don't know. The amount of bananas and that we shipped over from there was like insane. And if it was all tax-free, then that's just lost GDP for the entire country.
The Salvadoran elite were furious and protested, citing moral reasons, but in reality, they were just getting a little too crowded. So tensions were about as high as they could be, but then... It's the 1970 World Cup qualifiers, and both countries finished top of their qualifying tables, so it was...
Okay, we gotta see that. Let's go back and see what that said.
Countries finished top...
Honduras, Costa Rica, I don't know, Guatemala or something. Was damn. Why do I gotta do all the work here? You look it up if you want to know so bad. Yeah, go subscribe to these guys. This is called Oversimplified.
top of their qualifying table, so it was now time for them to play against each other in a series of matches. The first match took place in Honduras. The night before the game, Hondurans gathered outside the Salvadoran team's hotel, making noise and taunting them. The next day, Honduras defeated the exhausted Salvadorans with a late 90th minute goal. After the match, a young Salvadoran fan, unable to bear her country's defeat, shot herself. Disturbingly, the Salvadoran government glorified...
What? Why? There had to be something else wrong at that point. I mean, yeah, you love your teams a lot, but I take that back. The amount of people that will like do the most insane stuff for their favorite politicians is ridiculous. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. People will do stupid, insane things for people they really like and or teams. But I don't understand why you would shoot yourself over over losing a game. There had to be something else going on.
Glorified the incident and made her into a national hero. And at the next game, fans brought pictures of her to the stadium. Emotions were running high as the next match took place in El Salvador, and this time the tables were turned. The Hondurans had to endure a sleepless night in their hotel, and the next day, before the match started,
Just check the car through it.
instead of the Honduran flag, the Salvadorans raised a dirty rag. So great job at reducing tensions. El Salvador won decisively over the exhausted Hondurans. While spectators battled in the stands, Team Honduras fled home in a bulletproof bus with rocks being thrown at them, and the Honduran coach reportedly told his players that they were lucky they lost. In response to the defeat, Hondurans began terrorizing the Salvadoran settlers even more, in some cases reportedly throwing them off their land and burning.
Yeah, just imagine if they'd still won. They would have been literally murdered. Jeez.
Down their homes, and the immigrants began fleeing back to El Salvador. The final game in Mexico would decide who went to the World Cup. It was close, but El Salvador came out victorious, knocking Honduras out of the tournament. The atmosphere was riotous, literally, and back in Honduras, attacks on the Salvadoran immigrants further increased. This was too much for El Salvador to bear. With its people under attack and an unmanageable refugee crisis on its hands, El Salvador severed all diplomatic ties with Honduras and declared war. The football war is also known as the 100 Hours War, because that's how long it lasted.
Okay, I know soccer / football was the tipping point, obviously, but that is not why this war started. There is obviously other tensions simmering underneath the surface for decades, most likely. There is no way that was this is all about soccer. So I don't know. I think it's a little misleading here, but that's I guess that's beside the point.
Making it one of the shortest wars in history. El Salvador started by carrying out air raids on strategic locations within Honduras, including Toncontin International Airport, which prevented the Honduran Air Force from getting into the sky. Then, with their superior army, they began an invasion along two major roads, complete with light tanks and infantry. Their advance was rapid, and they were quickly approaching the Honduran capital. Then the Organization of American States met in a bit of a panic and unanimously agreed that war between El Salvador and Honduras was a bad thing and probably shouldn't continue.
Yeah, because it's going to ruin their banana production.
So they went to El Salvador and said, "Can you please stop invading?" And El Salvador declared, "Not until they stop being jerks," and so the war went on. The Honduran Air Force finally got into the sky, and with aid from neighboring Nicaragua, they successfully carried out air raids on Salvadoran air bases and oil facilities, crippling the Salvadoran supply line and stopping their advance dead. Caught in a bit of a stalemate, the situation was no longer advantageous to El Salvador, so when the Organization of American States once again asked them to stop and agreed to ensure the safety of the Salvadoran immigrants, El Salvador relented, and a ceasefire was organized on the 18th of July. Then the OAS said, "Can you now please withdraw your troops from Honduras? No, please, no, please, no, please, no. Do it or we'll sanction you." You know what? Just for you, I'll do it. So El Salvador...
Yeah, that's the thing. America has a ridiculous level of power when it comes to military. And while we definitely try to be, democratic in a lot of ways, a lot of people won't, especially other countries, won't go against America when it comes to military for obvious reasons. We spend insane amounts of money on military versus, things like our hospital networks or schooling or whatever. The other things that kind of don't really matter to most people in America. They'd rather just die from cheeseburger overdoses.
Salvador pulled its troops out of Honduras on the 2nd of August, and with casualties in the thousands, the war was over. The economies of both nations were damaged by the war, and El Salvador didn't have the capability to take care of all the returning immigrants, a crisis that eventually helped cause a civil war. The war left behind land and border disputes, some of which are still a cause of tension to this day. El Salvador went on to play in the World Cup, but lost every match they played and didn't make it past the group stage. So in the end, nobody achieved anything, and there were no winners. Except for this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to say that war was not about soccer or football. That war was definitely about certain companies basically wrecking all of the tax income from other countries. And there was also, when anyone crosses countries illegally, regardless of the concept, there's always going to be a tension between them, the people who live there and people who are trying to get a better life for themselves. And that's the problem with borders. But you kind of need them because it's just a complicated mess. Yeah, I'm gonna say that probably wasn't all about football though. It was well explained. It's just missing some things. I guess that's oversimplified for you though, right? Still, go subscribe to the channel. It was pretty good.